Okay, welcome everybody. It's always strange talking into the the internet without being able to see all of you, but we're so glad that you could join us today. I'm just doing a quick bit of housekeeping. Just to let you know that the event is being recorded and that the Q&A feature is available. So there'll be a little bit of time at the end of our wonderful panelists for you to be able to ask a few questions. So please enter your questions in the Q&A and our student moderators will answer those. And that's all. I'm going to hand it over to Dean Luce Kapler, who will be doing the official welcome.
Welcome, alumni, students, and friends to the Faculty of Education Student Wellness Panel. And thank you for choosing to join us as we learn and reflect on student well-being. The alumni you will hear from today represent the excellence and passion our graduates bring to their work. This panel will be sharing their insights and experience on how we can all support the wellness of our students during these challenging times. We're also joined by 3 current Census students, Luca De Francesco, Paris Tomazic, and Kate Rochon, who will be introducing our speakers and moderating the Q&A. This is our second year hosting a virtual homecoming event. And though we're looking forward to one day hosting another in-person event in Kingston, we're also cognizant that this platform opens up the opportunity to connect us to many more alumni. Last year's event attracted an audience across Canada and as far away as Australia. We're excited again to have our global alumni community joining us this afternoon. As this is homecoming, an event where alumni celebrate their experiences at Queen's, it seems particularly important to remember that this land we live, learn, and play on during our time at Queen's is traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It is also to acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relation to the territory and its other inhabitants today. Miigwech. Finally, a sincere thank you to our incredible speakers, Anne-Marie, Jane, Laura, and Jodie, and thank you again to everyone joining us today. I'm now going to hand the stage to Paris, who will be introducing Anne-Marie.
Hello, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Anne-Marie Mcdonald. So Anne-Marie is a lifelong Kingstonian who grew up in Kingston's North End. She graduated from Queen's with a dual degree in physical and health education and arts in 1993, and then a Bachelor of Education in 1995. More recently, she completed her Master of Education at Queen's in 2009. Her roles over the past 25 years have included classroom teacher, consultant, vice principal, and principal in urban, rural, and inner city schools. She is presently the principal at Bay Ridge Secondary School in Kingston's West End. So I'm so excited to introduce Anne-Marie, who will be presenting on mental health and well-being in a pandemic, the Ontario secondary school context.
Hello, so I'm assuming I am live now. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen, attempt to share my screen. Okay, and we'll just do a check to make sure that you can actually see the PowerPoint. Sorry, this is our first, our first time through Hopin. Hopefully you see the PowerPoint slides in front of you. I'd like to share just one sort of small perspective, the Ontario context, but I would argue the Eastern Ontario context and the experience of just one principal. Over the last few years in the pandemic, I've served in 2 different secondary schools, one school of about 650 students and another of about 500 students. If we go to a little history lesson, and I suppose for some of us who are long in the tooth, this might jog our memory. But if we look back in time at mental health in school in Ontario, then versus now, I would point out a few fundamental differences that have changed the landscape in schools. Back, and when I say back then, I mean pre-2006, students needed to remain in school only until age 16. We did have mental health supports in schools, but they were largely adolescent care workers or social emotional workers who might serve students who lacked a sense of belonging in school and may have needed some of their needs to be met, such as food at school and so forth. We also, in terms of mental health training during that era, we focused largely on, unfortunately, phenomena such as the school shooter profile and risk assessments and threat assessments in school, so we could determine if there were students who may be struggling with a mental illness that would cause them to become disenfranchised from school. Now flash forward to present day, Learning to 18 was instituted in 2006. And I will point out that that has been a turning point in schools, because we do know that some onset of mental health concerns arise in that period between 16, 18, 20 years of age. So in part, some of what we see now more frequently in schools is as a result of the fact that students are with us for longer and may be presenting with some of those issues. We also have far more enhanced supports in our schools than we have in the past. And I've included named staff as one of those because all of our staff are now getting training in suicide prevention, in mental health first aid. We still have adolescent care workers, but we now have regulated health professionals such as social workers and mental health. We also, particularly in our school board in Limestone, have programs specifically tailored to students who may have school phobia, school non-attendance, and may have diagnosed anxiety disorders that preclude them from being able to attend school. And we have a far better outside referral process than we have had in the past. We also have a more robust mental health training suite of courses that our staff take, such as suicide prevention and greater knowledge building in the area of adolescent childhood experiences and childhood trauma and how that impacts students. And then finally, I think we could all say that social media, and the research bears this out now, does have an impact on student mental health and well-being. And obviously the isolation associated with COVID-19 and the pandemic has as well. I thought I would share with you what the kids have to say. And again, this is local information. This is now in the public domain. But recently, our school board chose to do a student census. We surveyed students from kindergarten to grade 12. And what I'm sharing with you is data from grade 7 to 12 students. And our response rate was approximately 72% of grade 7 to 12 students completing this census. It was administered last fall, and those results have actually just now been released. And one bit of data that I wanted to share that I think is to us is that if you look at the chart you see before you here, basically 4 out of every 10 students in our classes are expressing a mental health, whether it be anxiety or mood concerns are expressing those, and we're seeing those in our classes. And the percentages bear out to be far greater than other things that we might normally associate with teenage angst and risk-taking behavior and things that tend to appear in the teenage years. I would also add to this that anecdotally, students tell me as a principal, I can't take that class, it's got too many students in it. Or I don't know anyone in that room, I can't go in there, I don't know anyone. I want to sit at the back so no one can be behind me for fear that people might make fun of me. I don't know that counselor. I don't want to meet them or talk to them because I don't know them. I have students who most recently will ask me to walk them to class, or will you tell the teacher how I am feeling? And so these are things that may have always popped up periodically, but certainly in my last few years in the pandemic, I would say that this is becoming more commonplace, certainly, than it has been in the past. If we look at what our teachers say, they will report students panicking, shaking, leaving the class, stating that they're having a panic attack. We have also had teachers and peers report to us that students have indicated that they don't want to live anymore. They have intense fear of public speaking, so students will feign illness on the day of a presentation or will flat out say, I simply can't do it, and fear of new situations in classroom environments. And so where it stands presently in the Ontario context is a tiered approach to mental health support for students. Tier 1 would be what we would think of largely preventative and proactive early identification of mental health concerns, often talking it out, sort of a counseling kind of approach would be commonplace in Tier 1. Tier 2, we would look more at skill building, helping students equip themselves with a toolkit of strategies that they would use in stressful times, for example. And Tier 3, where we would look at accessing supports in the community, having a referral through family physician and having assessments done if we believe or worry that there may be a diagnosable medical or mental health condition. So whereas in the past, our in-school supports would have dealt largely with Tier 1, I think it is fairly safe to say that our frontline staff are dealing with a lot more Tier 2 and some Tier 3, which had not been happening as frequently as it is now. And so this can all feel daunting and feel like a bit of doom and gloom, but I would want to end my portion here by saying that I do believe that there is hope for the future. There is all kinds of fascinating and encouraging research on the neuroplasticity of the brain, on resiliency and how we can retrain our brains, that we can use that small dose of anxiety and use that relationship to build up resiliency among students. I don't want to say too much more, as the other panelists will be referring to that, but the point being that there is hope for the future where student mental health and well-being is, but most importantly right now, there is far more awareness and there is far more destigmatization, probably than there ever has been before in schools. And we know that schools are the ideal context and have the ideal conditions to begin to see what those needs are and then meet those needs from there. And we know that we will all come out of this on the other side at some time. We will eventually find a new normal, and the need for constant change management will diminish. So I guess my parting thought is that while we are facing these things on a more regular basis in our schools, we are certainly holding out hope that there are many tools, many resources, far more personnel and interventions in place than there ever have been in the past. And I look forward to any questions you might have later on in the Q&A. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, much better. Thank you. Okay, so sorry about that. So thank you so much for the delightful presentation. Now I'm so excited to introduce Laura Stevens and Jane Mclaren. Laura Stevens provides psychological services at the Limestone District School Board for students in kindergarten to grade 12. Parents, learning and mental health concerns, and completes psychoeducational assessments to assist with academic programming, assessing community and school behavior, and to investigate the possibility of learning disabilities, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and intellectual disabilities. Laura is an ASIST suicide intervention trainer and a member of the Behavior Action Team who supports students across the district with complex learning, trauma, social, emotional, and behavior challenges. Jane Mclaren has been providing psychological services at the Limestone District School Board since 2006. She works at the elementary and secondary levels, consulting with staff, parents, and students. She supports developmental, social, emotional, and behavioral needs through assessment, consulting, and programming. So I'm pleased to introduce their presentation, and they'll both be presenting on fostering resilience through relationships, regulation, and competency. So I hope you will enjoy.
Thanks very much. We're just going to try to share our screen. Go to the tab. Oh dear. You know what? I'm going to share the entire screen. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Before it was in the window. Sorry, just give us a second here. But there's nothing there. So sorry, we're just trying to figure out how to share our presentation. Oh, there we go. Somebody helped us. Yay, thank you. Okay. All right. So Jane and I are here today to talk to you about resilience, about fostering resilience in three major ways: through relationships, regulation, and competency. So just to define resilience to get started, as you can see on the screen there, resilience is the capacity to adapt well to stress, challenge, trauma, or adversity. It's a developmental process over the lifespan, and it must be modeled, taught, and promoted. So we're going to investigate that. There are a variety of reasons why resilience is important. We know that it leads to improved learning and academic achievement, and it also contributes to better physical health, coping with stress and more positive emotions, and less risk-taking behaviors. So we're just going to play a video here. Hopefully, I don't know if yes, thank you. Is there volume on the video? No volume. Sorry, folks, I think we're just working on the volume for the video. And if we can't get it to go, maybe somebody can just give us a heads up and we will carry on.
Something that really can be built.
Yay.
Difficult circumstances. But resilience is not some magical quality. It's something that really can be built, even in difficult circumstances.
A key active core ingredient to building resilience are the relationships kids have to others who care about them.
Of course, families play a very important role, but nobody raises children in isolation. We have a huge amount of research to show the powerful impacts of teachers, coaches, other adults in the community with whom children have a chance to develop relationships, who play that critical supportive role of building resilience. As a result of responsive interaction, children build simple skills of coping and adapting. How to stop crying, how to regulate your behavior, being able to defer gratification.
You have an adaptive toolkit that allows you at moments of stress or challenge to bring out a number of potential skills that allow you to get through
it. As children get older, the sophistication of those skills increases. Being able to monitor situations, solve problems. The way we as a society can nurture the development of resilience is to help communities to pay more attention to building the capabilities of the adults who care for children and provide the supports they need to tip the scales toward more positive life outcomes.
And then when communities say, we want to be an active part of crafting the solution, to really understand what's necessary to produce the resilience, that's when the ball gets rolling.
Resilience building, capacity building is really in everyone's interest, and everyone reaps the benefits when we do that well.
So
we'll just skip through the next two because we weren't sure which version of the video would work, but we got it to work, so that's great.
So we're going to talk about 3 ways that you as teachers can foster that resilience. The first area that we'll talk about is supportive, responsive relationships. So we know that the presence of at least one supportive relationship helps children through adversity. As this note from a student to their teacher indicates, never underestimate the difference that you are making. Dr. Bruce Perry, childhood trauma expert, notes that the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human connection. People, not programs, change people. So how you communicate with students can have a big impact on building a sense of safety and trust. This is hardest to do when students are exhibiting difficult behaviors. Dr. Phillips has supported the Limestone Board with strategies adapted from the dyadic developmental psychotherapy model. She uses the acronym PACE to identify key elements in your interactions with students. So playfulness is a way of easing tension and helps children experience delight and enjoyment with you, strengthening the bond. Acceptance contributes to a child feeling worthwhile as they are. Accepting their motives but not their behavior reduces shame. Curiosity without judgment helps us understand the why behind their behavior, which they can then use to help understand the child better. And finally, empathy enables the child to feel that you are traveling with them into their distress and are available to them. Dr. Dan Siegel, in his book, The Whole Brain Child, identifies developing a coherent narrative of an upsetting event as an important therapeutic process. The idea is to help the student put the puzzle pieces together of an event and be able to retell in a coherent, fair, and self-compassionate way. So in this example, telling the story is great when we do something fun, like having a birthday party. Just by talking about it, we get to remember how much fun we had. But sometimes something upsetting happens to us, and we might not want to remember. The problem is that when we don't think about it, those puzzle pieces never get put together, and we might feel scared, sad, or angry without knowing why. Dr. Phillips encourages dialogue that helps integrate the emotional experience of the child with their cognitive understanding. When processing an event, start with emotional support, then bring in cognitive understanding through reflection on their or someone else's possible motivation or intent. This helps build brain integration. And some students are going to need more reflective engagement. So, for example, if they're overwhelmed by their emotions, and some need more affective engagement. So if they're more focused on the events, but not showing any emotion.
So next we're going to talk about the second way that we can foster some resilience. So moving from talking about relationships to talking about self-regulation makes a lot of sense, because as Stuart Shanker says, and the quote is up here, that self-regulation is only made possible and proceeds from a strong relationship. So in the next few slides, I'm really talking about sort of self-regulation, but first we want to talk about co-regulation and modeling. And we're talking about modeling and co-regulation together, because when we're helping another person regulate their behaviors or emotions, which is essentially co-regulating, we're also modeling strategies. This process is often necessary before we can expect children and youth to self-regulate on their own. For many individuals, self-regulation has to be explicitly taught or modeled, and this is the process of co-regulation. So the first point is social emotional learning, which is so important for building skills. To regulate our feelings, we have to know what it is we're feeling. Accuracy is important. So help students to name the emotion, the whole idea that you can name it to tame it. So label your own and your students' emotions and teach them to be able to identify and articulate how they're feeling. Validating emotions and feelings is also super important, and it is most easily done by reflecting back what your student what they're feeling, and if you know, maybe why they're feeling that way. So for example, I wonder if you might be feeling sad because you weren't included when your friends were playing at recess together. Using I wonder is often better received than I think or I feel, especially with older children and teens. And I wonder statements are also helpful when problem solving out loud to work through the process of resolving problems and conflicts. So as much as you can when you're doing this, model what it looks like to regulate your own emotions in the moment. Take a deep breath, take a break, problem solve out loud, wonder aloud what might help or what you might do next. The last three strategies I'm going to talk about on this slide are starting with mindfulness. So practicing mindfulness is all about being in the present, as we know. Sometimes people talk about eating mindfully, paying attention to every bite of something, or actively being mindful as you go about a task. There's many apps and guided meditations for mindfulness online, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Using positive or constructive language is really, really helpful as well. It doesn't need to paint the rosiest of pictures. It's really important that it reflect reality and actual possible ideas and outcomes. And lastly, I'm sure there's many of you who do this exceptionally well, but let students know that mistakes are okay, an important part of learning and building resilience. If you make mistakes in your teaching or how you respond to something, that's okay. Acknowledge them. Let kids know that you're doing the best that you can with the information you have. And it's okay to not know what's going to happen. Modeling this for kids goes a long way in building resilience. It's tempting to say to kids, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. But instead, you might try saying, this is hard, and I understand that you're worried, and let's come up with a plan, and we'll try to get through it together. Building social emotional skills in these general ways can be done with the whole class or as a small group as a first step. Then, when an upset occurs, students can be assisted to come to a place of calm through co-regulation, modeling, mindfulness. And once kids have been able to sort of be calmed and their rational or their thinking brain has been restored, then they're able to do some problem solving and work through any issues.
Okay, the next is a video clip about co-regulation.
Hi, Angry.
Welcome, Angry.
Welcome, Angry.
Breathe with me.
Breathe with me.
Say you're safe.
You're safe.
You're safe. It's okay for you to feel angry.
It's okay for you to feel angry.
Yeah, it is. You can handle it.
You can handle it.
You can handle it.
You can handle it.
Well, she didn't know what to do with all that anger inside. So you would use angry quite a bit, and we would say your eyebrows are like this, your mouth is like this. Breathe with me. You're safe. And then you were able to solve the problem. It used to take a long time for you to calm down. You'd almost throw up. And that, like today, when you got upset in the circle, it only took a couple minutes for you to calm down, and you gagged a little, but not much, right? Because what did you learn to do? So you learned to bring angry with you if you needed angry, but not become angry, right?
Okay, so this video demonstrates co-regulation in an in-the-moment event with a focus on soothing the child's upset before. Oh, there's a couple more versions of the video we don't need. Soothing the child's upset before addressing any behavior that might have occurred. Problem solving can come later. So in the video, it uses validation of feeling. So it's okay for you to be angry. Externalizing the emotion and making it a part of you, not all of you. So hi, angry, and welcome, angry. Helping the child see that he can cope, you can handle it, and mindful breathing. It also shows the importance of retelling the narrative, as the teacher does with the girl, reviewing how she used to handle her anger compared to now. She also helps her recall what the emotion looks like. So eyes and eyebrows look like this, mouth looks like this, and co-regulates with her by inviting her to breathe with me, something they do together. So some other ways to promote regulation, helping students to work with their feelings. So checking in with their feelings daily. You can use a rating scale or chart. Encouraging expression of feelings through the arts. So this gives an opportunity for students to work through some of their emotional upset. They could journal, use music, dance, theater, art, or poetry. Making time for play is really important. You want to let them direct the play as much as possible. Games like hide and seek, building forts, and chasing games are ways that they can work through their fears. And games of building or destroying or even wrestling are ways to work through frustration. You can also provide rituals, gratitude rituals, where you identify something good from the night before or at the end of the school day. Can be a way to help focus on positive emotions. Sensory breaks are great for struggling students and can include opportunity for movement and resistance, so things like heavy lifting. Some schools have sensory rooms where students can have needed movement and play breaks throughout the day with a caring staff member. You can create a safe space for feeling sad or angry Feelings need to come out. And note that this does not mean condoning bad behavior. And finally, transitional objects can help students who struggle with arrival or departure.
So sometimes we need to explicitly teach some self-regulation or calming strategies, and this eventually leads to competence. So here's just a few examples. Deep breathing or belly breathing done properly can be very, very effective. And we often tell people, take a deep breath. But sometimes we really need to teach this to kids. So for younger children, you could encourage them to pretend to blow up a balloon or to blow bubbles into a milkshake. And I really like this graphic. So in through the nose, out through the mouth, with the belly rising up and down. Older children and teens have typically been taught this type of breathing at some point, and it can help to do it with them so that they don't rush through it. Some kids like to trace their fingers while they're breathing. So inhaling to the tip of your finger, exhaling 5 times on one hand, 10 times for both hands, which is a great strategy that anybody can take anywhere with them. And because anxiety and worries tend to affect our ability to self-regulate and they like to speed up into the future, grounding activities can be really useful. And they literally mean feeling the ground beneath our feet and being in the present moment. So these activities can help bring our focus back to the here and now. And some ways to do this are through our senses, like you're seeing on the presentation there. Another way is to do some vigorous activity, even 25 jumping jacks, or to experience a change in temperature, like a cold or a warm cloth on your face, that type of idea. Another idea is to create a relaxation menu with your students. So this is something that could be done for kids of any age. And like a restaurant menu has different sections, such as relaxation activities that could be done alone, with others, at home, at school, outdoors, something active, something social. Because the setting will impact the activities that are appropriate, this is a great activity to have kids think about how they could relax in a variety of different places, with or without others. And we wanted to talk about uncertainty. And we're certainly living through some uncertain times these days with the pandemic. But Lynn Lyons has been talking about uncertainty for a long time. So she's a psychotherapist who works with children with anxiety. And she actually suggests reveling in uncertainty. So we know that many children who are anxious demand certainty. But when we don't know the answers, it's hard to give that to them. And even when we do, being comfortable with that uncertainty, the mights and the maybes, is a really important step in building resilience, in building our skills up about what we don't know. So sometimes, rather than giving a definitive answer, especially when we don't have one, it can be even more helpful to say things like, well, I don't know, that might happen. Maybe we'll have to wait and see, but I'm here with you while we go through that. Okay, another strategy that she talks about is like what I know and what I don't know. And I actually use this with my own kids when we were talking about going back to school, because there were lots of questions and lots of things that we didn't know and some things that we did know. So the idea is to make a list. So what I know on one side of the paper, what I don't know on the other side of the paper. And, you know, as you learn things about the situation, as things become known, then you can move them to the known side of the list or draw an arrow, that kind of thing. And it really helps us to be able to just sit in the uncertainty with the things that we don't know. And some of those things we have no control over, and that's okay. And then just sort of build our knowledge of what we do know.
Okay, the third area that we're going to talk about is building a sense of competence. So competence and fostering self-efficacy. It's important to remember that we want to focus on building a child's belief in their abilities. All students have competencies, but many aren't aware of them or don't believe in them. Your belief in your competence to perform tasks and meet challenges is known as self-efficacy. A sense of competence enables students to strive for goals, take risks, and persist in the face of difficulties. The best way to foster a sense of competence is through praising the strategies used, skills developed, and effort, rather than competence itself or ability. When you praise ability, you run the risk of them losing their sense of competence when they encounter failure. And you can try letting students identify their own mistakes and ideas of how to fix them rather than trying to do that for them. Help your students find activities that promote a feeling of mastery. Focus on things that they can already do. Have them share something with the class that they learned outside of school, such as a hobby or interest they feel good about. Remind them of how they have successfully handled challenges in the past. So we call in competence. For example, remember that when you kept working on your project, even when you wanted to give up, that was being persistent. Role play to practice new skills. Set small, reasonable goals and focus on what they accomplish rather than on what they are not able to do yet. And finally, helping others can be a way to foster a sense of empowerment. Help them identify kind things that they can do for others. So we hope we've given you a couple of new ideas to support and foster students' resilience in these difficult times. At the same time, we know that the demands on teachers are overwhelming and student needs are increasing. We recognize that support and change from the top is necessary. Along the way, though, please take good care and remember to put your own oxygen mask on first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane and Laura. Next up, I'm pleased to present Jodie Bosch. Jodie is a PhD candidate at Queen's University, studying resiliency in post-secondary student leaders as they transition from high school to university. She is specifically focused on how and why students do well despite the challenges that they experience. Outside of her studies, Jodie is a registered psychotherapist who helps individuals navigate traumatic experiences, grief, anxiety, depression, life transitions, relationship challenges, chronic pain, illness, and workplace injuries. She has experience working with students, community members, and first responders. In 2021, Jodie received the Agnes Benedictson Tricolor Award because of her dedication to supporting students' mental health throughout the pandemic and for ensuring accessible supports for each student. I'm pleased to present Jodie and her presentation on how to chill out when everything is heating up.
Thank you, Luca. I'm going to do my best and see if I can share my screen. On my front, it looks like it is being shared, but I am unsure if it is there on yours. Can someone just post in the chat if there is? It is there? Oh, okay, amazing. So today I'm really thankful for the space, and it is really a pleasure to be here talking about a topic I am really passionate about, and I believe has the power to impact change within us and promote positive well-being for ourselves and our students. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and focus on things that we can do as educators for ourselves and our students in order to move forward and reframe our language. My hope is that through our brief time today, we could explore the power of reframing language for our students, our loved ones, and for ourselves, especially during challenging times. However, these practices can be used even when things are going well, not only when things might feel like they're falling apart. My hope is that you'll be able to consider your personal narrative and the words and phrases you use when talking to yourself and others, and how incorporating positive language in your life may have the potential to lead to feeling more authentic, promote self-kindness and self-compassion, and nurture a safe environment for yourself and others. And for us as educators, we're no stranger to reframing language when we talk about a growth mindset. So I'm hoping to provide a little bit of a different approach to see what we can do moving forward. So just a few things we're going to work through today. I want to talk about the importance of reframing language by reflecting on the fact that we might have limited vocabularies of how we talk about our difficult experiences, provide a few practical examples of how we could positively reframe our language. And I tried to draw from really timely examples that might be relevant during COVID and our experience now, and explore how to be authentic when reframing our language. So something that has come up time and time again in my practice and in my circle that I've noticed is that we have a pretty limited vocabulary in how we talk about our experiences. So the one example I want to draw forward is talking about emotions. And I appreciated that Jane and Laura talked about this as well and what we can do in that front. So when something bad happens, we typically talk about feeling sad or angry. Especially for students and little kids, there's not really a wide range of emotions that come forward. They're sad and angry. On the other side, the positive emotions that are commonly referenced are happy or excited. And when I was thinking about this, it brought me back to Pixar's Inside Out. And for those of you who might not have seen it, it's about how a young girl is moving across the country and the challenges she's experiencing, and the 5 emotions that help her navigate this difficult situation. And those are joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. And when we ask people how they're feeling, these emotions or synonyms of them tend to be the most popular emotions. And the movie does a nice job at putting voice to emotions that we experience. But what we need to recognize is that we have a range of emotions outside of just these. Just even thinking about those 5 core emotions, 4 of them are negative. And that's not the movie's fault. Our brains are wired to think of the negative. We have to actively make changes to rewire our brain to think about the positive. Because in the past, when we had a tiger chasing after us, we couldn't just stop and think. We had to just go and run. Versus now, we don't typically have a literal tiger chasing after us, and we can work with our brains to consider, is there the potential that things are going well and will work out for me? Of course, this doesn't dismiss the negative emotions that we might be feeling. So we have this one lonely emotion, joy, that's supposed to represent every single positive experience that we're feeling. But typically it doesn't. It might also be optimism or trust, acceptance, pride, gratitude, hopeful, confident, energized, or inspired. And those are just a few. So as we take a deeper dive into the other primary emotions, I wonder, do they match the emotion that we or others are feeling? Maybe, sometimes. But we could think about, are there other words that might be more representative of the emotions that we or our students are feeling? And if we are able to replace them with something that is more representative, will that in turn better fit and take the pressure off or reduce the intensity of the emotions while we transition to a more positive or safer space? So if we expand the words that we have and consider replacing one that is not fully representative of our experience with something that might be a better fit, we can actually change our relationship with the situation. And I will bring forward our limited vocabulary so that we can reflect on the language we use and see where we could thicken our vocabulary a little bit more. So I'd like to bring forward 2 big examples in detail, and then I'll bring forward a few little examples as well of ways in which we could change our language and discuss how it may positively impact you or your students. Of course, these are limited examples that I have found to be useful in my life or my practice, but they are no way representative of all of the experiences or all of the ways we could reframe our language. We would be here all day. But I say that in terms of some of these might not resonate for you or might feel like they don't fit, and that's okay. I maybe challenge you to just think about how replacing one word or phrase for another might impact us positively. I also want to acknowledge that we all use these phrases, so bringing them up is by no means to shame or say we're doing something wrong. It just provides the opportunity to think about how can we be curious about the words that we use. So the first example I want to bring forward is, are you feeling better? And this one has come up really recently, especially as we're transitioning sort of back into a workplace or a regular environment through COVID. So the simple illustration, something bad happens, an undetermined amount of time passes, and we ask someone, are you feeling better? So I want to just be curious about that in a few ways. So when we ask that, I wonder, does it communicate to the others, to somebody else or the person we're asking, that they should be feeling better? But when we think about that, what happens if they're not? Is there then pressure to say yes to appease the speaker? Or is there guilt or shame that comes up if the answer is no? My second question is, what are they feeling better then? This one feels a little tricky. Typically, when we ask this question, we really do ask it out of a place of love, in hopes that they really are improving or in a different place than they were before. But because the question is vague, it does not allow space to pinpoint in what areas they might be feeling better. So an example that comes up for me is wondering if a student lost a loved one, they might not want to admit they're feeling better, because what would that mean for the relationship they had with that person? Would they feel like they miss them less if they're feeling better? Or if someone says yes, does that mean that all the work they've put into getting to a different place would feel not as good because they recognize how much more they had to come? And that could be exhausting or discouraging. The next curiosity around, is there room for more than one answer? Are you feeling better feels like a little bit of a static question that really only leaves room for the answer to be yes. And that might just be how I phrase the question, but it can also be likened to leading the witness, because we've set up the question in a way that we're hoping for one answer. And it might be vulnerable for the answer to be no. So we set it up, so are you feeling better, to maybe appease our vulnerability or not if we don't know how to sit with that discomfort. But we have to remember that the person going through it likely is experiencing more vulnerability through their situation. And what I call my favorite curiosity of this one is looking at, does coping with difficult situations happen on a continuum? So when I think of this, does it just stand with, we were feeling bad and then we were feeling better? I was sick and now I'm healed. And what this unfortunately can do is it doesn't leave space for anything else than bad or better, where maybe we could be really proud and celebrate that someone is feeling a solid okay. And when we think about it on this, okay, it's one side versus the other, it doesn't allow space for our brain to recognize the progress that we're making. So we know that coping looks a little bit more like this and like this, and it doesn't just change magically. There's time and what we do with time of how we change our experience. So possible ways we could reframe, are we feeling better? Are there ways in which you're noticing changes in what you've been feeling? So if we ask how they've noticed what they're feeling today versus yesterday, last week, a month ago, it will allow them to tangibly connect to that feeling of growth, but also recognize progress in a way they might not have experienced. Maybe we ask, are there activities you were able to engage with that you weren't able to before? How are you in social situations? Is it the same as it was a month ago? You know, a while ago, you told me you were crying all day, every day. Are there moments in which you're not crying? What are you doing in those moments? And the second point in which, are there ways in which you are feeling stronger? And while the phraseology might also feel like it's a yes or no question, the reason I like this one is even the strongest person can get stronger. So this allows some space that, you know, no matter where you are, there's room for growth. And when doing that, again, we create space in our brain to move forward. The next example that I want to talk about is loneliness versus solitude. This one feels very important during COVID, especially as we reintegrate into whatever we want to call this time, our normal, our new normal, or just the world that we're living in currently. So especially during the first few months of the pandemic, we really did not know what was going on, and we were afraid. We were told to go against our social needs of seeing each other and connection and be alone in our own homes. For some, home was safe, and it was a positive environment. And even within that, there was some frustration around being around the same people all the time, or you became frustrated because you couldn't live your normal life. For others, home maybe wasn't so safe, and that brought on some different challenges. And it was lonely, and for many, it's still lonely. A lot of social anxiety has come up, and people are struggling to reintegrate into the world. They might be feeling isolated, And one that I hear very often, which is very sad, is I don't have a right to feel this way because everyone is going through it. So I want to just break down a little bit more into the difference between loneliness and solitude. So loneliness means being without company, cut off from others, feeling sad from being alone, feelings of bleakness or desolation. Solitude could mean the quality of being alone or remote from society, or enjoying one's company when alone. And the main difference I see is that there's this negativity around loneliness versus solitude creates this space for what can happen when you're alone. So solitude is being alone without feeling lonely. But what I do want to bring forward of what it doesn't mean, or even before that, sorry, I'm jumping the gun a little bit on that one. What I want us to be curious about is, does thinking about our alone time as a period of replenishment change our relationship with being alone? The second question I want to bring forward is, am I actually feeling lonely? The answer might be yes. And if that is the case, we should honor that and create space for that as well. However, sometimes the answer might not be yes. Sometimes we might find that if we replace I'm feeling lonely to I have the space to do what I want or need right now, we could change our relationship with loneliness. And finally, how can I spend this time alone to focus on my needs? Again, what I don't want this to come forward as is what this doesn't mean is that we should label all feelings of isolation or loneliness as solitude. We don't want to sugarcoat the hard emotions that we are feeling. We want to honor those. But we also can create space to critically explore our experience and our emotions that go with that. So possible ways that we could reframe loneliness is maybe thinking and being reflective of, what am I learning from this time alone? What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about how I like to be supported? What are the benefits of having time to connect with myself? So other phrases that I want to briefly bring forward just for the purpose of time are ones that I notice come up a lot. And I'm, of course, guilty of doing this, but also seeing it in others. So the first one is, I'm trying to. And you could fill in the blanks of whatever feels difficult to deal with. So maybe for some, I'm trying to find myself after a relationship ended. I'm trying to adjust to being a new mom. I'm trying to balance school and work. I'm trying to integrate back into virtual school. And when we try to imagine all of these things, and even I hear myself and I catch myself as I say that, in reality, we're doing all of those things. You're probably doing a lot more than trying, and you're probably living it. And this is very important for kids as well, because they then feel like they're failing or they might not be doing things effectively when in reality they probably are. So if we simply, and I realize it's not that simple, but if in our phrases we take out I'm trying to, I'm finding myself again after my relationship ended. I'm navigating all of the emotions I'm feeling. I'm balancing school and work. It takes off the onus from us and recognize that we've come this far to allow us to problem solve of how we can move forward. The second one is one that I think is the most common that we kind of go around is I should be. Again, you could probably insert any single thing you feel like you could be doing right now. And it's one of those things that adds a lot of pressure almost for no real reason. It maybe introduces doubt that you're not enough or you're not doing enough. It could be a self-attack or self-criticism. It might not feel authentic. So some examples that I've noticed, maybe it's come up for myself or others, is I should be doing better in school. I should be able to be a teacher and a parent at the same time. I should be more advanced in my life right now. And someone once phrased it to me as, did you just shit on yourself? And when I heard it in that way, it really drove home the point of maybe it is a self-attack on that. So maybe a different question can be, if I do something, does it align with my values? So I would challenge you to recognize when you use the word should or when you notice others using the word and asking yourself, does it fit? And maybe instead you could replace it with I could or I want to. I want to achieve in school. I want to balance my role as a parent and teacher. I recognize that where I am in my life right now may not be exactly where I want to be. I can do X to get there. And with that, it allows space to set goals and move forward effectively. Finally, I want to talk about maybe not meeting expectations for yourself and recognizing this in students as well. And for me, this feels like a big one. So to go along with the last should that we talked about, I should be more advanced in my life right now. Maybe we've heard, by this age, I wanted to do X, Y, Z. I wanted to be married. I wanted to be a principal. I wanted to have a permanent position, whatever it might be. We have these expectations of ourselves. And I looked up the definition of expectation. And the one that I found that I think really hits the nail on the head is a belief that someone will or should achieve something. So even there's that should that we just talked about. And just hearing that, I feel the pressure in the language that's brought forward. It feels like if you don't meet the expectation, you're a failure or you're not good enough. So I want to challenge or maybe be curious about the fact of, is there another word we could introduce instead of expectations of I have an intention to do something? The definition that I found around intention is an aim or a plan or what someone seeks to do or bring about. So while a simple change, an intention might feel a little bit more like a guidebook rather than a rule book, where an expectation might feel like we have to do something. And in this sense, I would like to do this, but if it doesn't work out, I could give myself permission to be okay with it. It allows space also for plans to change, which we know every single plan that we had thought we were going to have through COVID really got flipped upside down. So by changing this phraseology, it allows us grace if things might not go according to this plan. And it takes, again, away the onus of failure, and we look at things a bit differently than we have imagined. And that doesn't give us an out to not try or a place to say, oh, well, I don't have to do it because if I don't meet it, it's going to be fine. It just allows us room within our capacity and current context to make mistakes and move forward. So I just want to leave you with one big point in terms of feeling of authenticity when reframing. And it's what I had said before, that some of these phrases might not resonate with you, and that's all right. And there is some basis for fake it till you make it. And maybe there is some exploration. I might want to do these things for a week, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever it might be, and see what happens, notice changes, or even just recognize the language that people are using and how I might take a step back and consider how that's impacting me. But it does have to feel genuine. It does have to fit within your experience. And so you have to be realistic of what makes sense for you and not just, again, reframe and sugarcoat everything. We can reframe while leaving space to honor the negativity or something bad that might be happening, or even that solid okay I spoke about, but also finding ways to expand that and make it feel a little bit more authentic and in a way that resonates with you. So my hope is that you'll consider the language that you use and how it might impact you negatively and positively, and what you can do to bolster and nourish the positive rather than the negative for yourself and others. Again, I look forward to any questions you might have, and feel free to connect with me. And thank you for allowing me to share this space with you today.
We'd like to thank, the volume's working this time, Anne-Marie, Jane, Laura, and Jane for their insightful presentations this afternoon. We have learned a lot about mental health, well-being, and hope to bring these newfound knowledges into our own classrooms.
Next, we will be facilitating a Q&A session where you can ask questions to any of the four speakers. We ask that you type and send your questions through the Q&A function in Hopin to the side of your screen, or if not, then into the chat box.
Can people hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to pop on because when we were doing our little bit there, somebody had posted a really good question about cultural differences and finding out how kids respond in their private cultural environments. So I just wanted to sort of address that while people might come up with some other questions. And, Gina and I were sort of thinking that really comes back to the first thing that we talked about, which was relationships, right? And building those respectful relationships that we have with students and their families to learn more about their culture and about how things might be different than what we're used to, and how we can respectfully teach and talk about that and learn, right? Because we're all learning, and we certainly don't want to pretend to say this is how you're going to learn how to relax, or this is how it's done. It can be done in such a variety of ways, and I think that there's something for all of us to learn, taking those different cultural perspectives into account. So I really wanted to thank Mona for bringing that up, and it's not something that we addressed directly in the presentation, but it certainly made me think about relationships and getting to know people on an individual level.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So I do see another question. So this is for all four of you. So the question is, if you had to give one piece of advice to all teachers regarding mental health and wellness in the classroom, what would it be? I guess one main takeaway. And that one, I guess, is for all four. So whoever would like to answer.
I'm happy to share my thoughts. I think what really feels important, and maybe this is timely, and I'm noticing for teachers around me, but also other individuals, we have this feeling of feeling like we need to fix everything and take on the weight of the world. And it's really, really important just to recognize, what do I have that I'm doing that I can do to support my students and myself to get through this time? And maybe that means, is there a practice that I want to integrate into my classroom? Do I want to share in gratitude with my classroom every day? Do I want to incorporate that mindfulness into the classroom? And maybe choosing one thing that feels authentic to your experience, and not feeling like you have to pull in this resource and this resource and this resource, because what will happen through that is we'll just get burnt out and tired. So find one thing that feels good for you, one strategy that any of us have talked about today or somebody else, or that you already do, and find ways to make that routine. And also be kind to yourself as you recognize that you're already dealing with a lot as an educator, and your students will recognize how you're making them feel safe. Check in with them, but also just keep doing what you're doing.
I just wanted to add on to that. I think that's really good advice, Jodie. And I was also thinking about keeping it simple and keeping it within your own, go with your personality, your style, right? How you do business, because that's what will come off as the most authentic and the most genuine thing that you can do. But I love the idea of just, obviously we're throwing out lots of ideas today, but kind of picking something that really resonates with you and giving it a try. For me, it really comes back to sort of intentionally introducing those things and doing them regularly, because then when we do get agitated or anxious or worried or anything like that, then kids and adults are going to be more able to access those strategies if we've practiced them in times of low stress, right? So it's nice to sort of those daily things, if you can add them.
And you could also just think about it in terms of, your goal might be only to support one particular student that you're finding particularly challenging or in need of support. So if targeting something for the whole class doesn't feel right, just even targeting one goal or one intervention for a particular student or group of students could also have a really big impact.
I was struggling to find just one piece of advice or one word or phrase, so this will be different than that. I think what I would say for sort of frontline educators is the obvious, which is not to personalize it. When you encounter a student who's very dysregulated, approach it that all behavior is communication of some form or another. I often use the phrase, when you come across dysregulation, think WTF. Not that WTF, but what's the function? What's the function of this behavior right now? Is it avoidance? Is it so that whole notion that Jodie shared about curiosity? Approach those situations with curiosity and try your best not to personalize it. And I think all you can do is your best. And then when you know better, you do better. When you know better, you do better. So the more we all learn, the more we then adapt our strategies in order to meet students where they're at.
Yeah, those were all really great answers and really great advice, especially as new teachers going into the field with us. We did have another question in the chat. And the question is, so our school is considering allowing fully vaccinated students to attend in-person school without wearing a mask. And not all students are fully vaccinated for various reasons, health, etc. And so what advice do you have to help non-vax students deal with the anxiety of being different as they still have to wear masks at school?
Mm-hmm. Lots of great questions there, Nancy. We certainly haven't had any direction as of yet that we will be without masks, but perhaps that time will be coming. At present, just so you're aware, locally, they have relaxed the mask compliance for extracurriculars. So, for example, indoor sports, students will now not have to be masked. And one question that came to me was, okay, what does that look like then on the court for a student who's not vaccinated and needs or wants to wear a mask to feel safe, and others who aren't? So that is late breaking information in our local board as of the last 24 hours. So this is evolving daily. I wish that I had a quick answer to how to manage the anxiety of being different or being seen as different. I do suspect, though, that there will be students and families who continue to wear a mask regardless of anything having been lifted. So you're raising lots of good questions and questions that I was wrestling with myself last night about what's this now going to look like for students who engage in extracurriculars, who are vaccinated and not, maskless and wearing a mask, getting tested or not having to get tested, self-isolating if they're exposed or not if they have been vaccinated. So this is going to start to look different in the school setting as a result of being vaccinated or not. So sorry, good question. Wish I had more answers.
I'm not currently in the school system, so I might be speaking off base for this, but maybe humor me. I wonder if I would go about it in terms of how I go about all questions of identity and helping the students feel secure in themselves and their self-esteem and their confidence in what is going well for them, and noticing ways in which they are similar. Again, that doesn't take away from those feelings of possibly isolation or feeling different, but perhaps we could find other ways that they're connecting and close the gap a little bit on being that different, and recognizing that they're doing it for a reason, and holding towards that for themselves, how they can feel comfortable with what they're doing and know that they're keeping themselves safe.
Okay, I think we have another one here, and it looks like this one to Jodie. And Jodie, would you say that the negative emotions that people can feel, whether it's a student or a teacher or anyone in the system, is just as important as the positive emotion that comes after in terms of self-growth and development?
Oh my, I want to just nod and hold all the space for all the emotions. And yes, negative emotions play a huge role and a huge part. Oftentimes, I heard a quote recently that really resonated with me in terms of emotions that are buried alive never die. And if we don't create space for those negative emotions and don't feel what we're feeling and don't help students feel what they're feeling, what happens is that then trauma might develop. And that might be the difference in a negative incident being, having a traumatic incident, turning from having trauma symptoms that might come with it to developing into trauma responses and trauma patterns. Of course, some of those are biological and is not completely under somebody's control, but there is space for, we need to feel the feelings and process them and create opportunities to share those. And there's a lot of modeling that comes with that, especially for young ones that don't know how or where to hold these feelings. Also, a lot of adults who weren't necessarily taught that of what to do with their feelings are now experiencing a lot of challenges because the negative emotions are uncomfortable and they might not want to go there because it's scary. So yes, negative emotions are just as important as positive emotions. All emotions are important. It feels a little cliche to say that, but it's true. It's just different context. The context that I wanted to bring forward today was how we could reframe the positive, but not to discount the negative as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jodie. I do see one more. So the question is, I believe, for all four of you again. And it's, are there any resources you can recommend to learn more or continue learning about these topics?
I might add on a local level, for any of you who are local, Kingston and area has been fortunate to recently receive a $5 million donation from the Sisters of Providence, and that funding is to go towards programming to support vulnerable youth. What will be coming out of that is some work in helping to train frontline staff across all sectors, the education sector, healthcare sector, social service sectors, in early childhood trauma and the impacts of trauma and how to build resiliency. And what this means locally is free training for frontline staff, and that's already underway, but you'll see more and more of this becoming available in the community. So people in the education world might be interested in that. So this is through the Community Foundation of Kingston. They are the keepers of this very generous donation. And it does mean that we're going to start seeing in the Kingston KFLNA area a rolling out of things that will be happening to tap into this funding in a meaningful way. And the hope is that it will create system change, understanding what trauma-informed practice or what neuro-informed practice looks like across the sectors. So one aspect of it is training, but there might also be a self-regulation curriculum, kind of like what you saw in the video clip of the teachers who were teaching students how to self-regulate. We might actually have some funding to put towards that, to enact that and pilot that in some schools. So exciting and hopeful information locally, and I guess stay tuned and keep an eye and ear out for training that will be becoming available.
I just wanted to add, when Jane and I were putting our information together, like resilience is such a big topic, we were like, how are we going to pare that down, right? So that's how we kind of came up with the three main areas in terms of relationships, regulation, and competence. And we really tried to draw on some of the research and gurus in those departments, right? So I know the session's being recorded, but we did mention Bruce Perry. He's very well known in the world of resilience. Dan Siegel, who wrote The Whole Brain Child, which is a really good read. We also talked about Shan Phillips, who is a local psychologist who works in our area specifically around attachment and trauma work. And then I talked about Lynn Lyons, and I feel like Stuart Shanker, who is all about self-regulation and has quite an extensive amount of resources and web presence as well. So those are some good folks in the world who are kind of leading the way in the areas that Jane and I were talking about.
The Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, where the initial video clip came from, is also a great resource. There's a lot of information on that website.
Yeah, I want to echo what Anne-Marie and Laura and Jane have mentioned. I'm going to share a link in the chat as well. The government of Western Australia has a pretty extensive resource bank for worksheets that you can use both for yourself and as educators or clinicians. And I find that it's very accessible for us. And so I'll just share that link. But I talked a lot about reframing language, and Carol Dweck is kind of the guru in reframing. So that's something that you can look at as well. So I'll just share that.
Awesome. So I think that leads us to the end of the Q&A session today. So we want to thank you all so much for the wonderful questions. And again, to Anne-Marie, Jane, Laura, and Jodie for sharing with us today. And I will now hand it over to Becca.
All right. So thank you to all of the Census students for your wonderful Q&A. It was great to hear from you. It was amazing to hear from all of our speakers, and I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca.
Yeah, what a wonderful afternoon this has been. Anne-Marie, Laura, Jane, Jodie. It's so wonderful to listen to professionals like yourselves speaking about issues that matter so much to us in education. And I always come away from sessions like this feeling reassured that there's lots of good happening in the world. And so I really want to thank all of you, and thank you to our CESA students. We're always so proud of your leadership. And again, you showed that today. So thank you so much. And to all who came, we really appreciate you coming. We know that online can get tiring, but we're so glad that you could connect with us. And we are hoping one of these days that we could actually meet in person, which would be wonderful. So thank you for coming. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of your evening. And when you leave, there is a post-event survey that if you fill that out, it will really help us with future programming. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great evening. Bye.